In a landmark 6-3 ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court today dramatically curtailed the power of federal judges to issue broad, nationwide injunctions. This decision, authored by Justice Amy Coney Barrett, represents the most significant judicial check on lower court authority in over a generation. At the heart of the case was whether judges have the right to block federal policies on a national scale, even when only a handful of plaintiffs are involved. For decades, judges in various circuits have issued wide-reaching injunctions, halting immigration orders, environmental regulations, and healthcare rules across the country. But Barrett wrote that such sweeping blocks exceed the judiciary's equitable reach. Relief must be tailored to the parties before the court. The case stems from former President Donald Trump's January 2025 executive order restricting birthright citizenship. 3 federal courts had immediately blocked the order across all 50 states. But the Supreme Court's ruling now forces those judges to reconsider. Was a nationwide halt justified, or should their decisions only apply to the plaintiffs involved? Importantly, today's ruling does not activate Trump's policy outright. Instead, it gives lower courts 30 days to reassess whether their injunctions are too broad. Legal experts say that in the meantime, the executive order remains in limbo, but the balance of power has tilted. The ruling doesn't weigh in on the constitutional question at the center of the policy, whether the 14th Amendment protects birthright citizenship. That debate will continue in court. But this procedural decision has already altered how federal courts can respond to executive authority. Critics say it weakens judicial oversight. Supporters call it a necessary restraint on judicial activism. What's clear is that the court just redefined how legal resistance to presidential power is structured. The court's opinion, while procedural on the surface, signals a deeper philosophical divide over how American democracy is balanced between the branches of government. Writing for the majority, Justice Barrett framed the ruling as a correction to decades of judicial overreach. She emphasized that injunctions must be limited to redress actual plaintiffs' grievances, not serve as sweeping blocks against executive action. Judges are not lawmakers, she noted, and their remedies must reflect that. The dissenting justices, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson, strongly disagreed. In a blistering opinion, Sotomayor argued that restricting nationwide injunctions will leave people unprotected from policies that violate rights en masse. When a law injures many, the judiciary must respond for the many, she wrote. The dissent called the ruling a retreat from justice under the guise of restraint. Legal scholars are divided. Some praise the court for restoring clarity to injunction use. Others warn it hands unchecked power to the executive, especially in urgent matters like immigration or public health. This ruling also adds complexity to the growing number of lawsuits challenging Trump's executive orders. Now, each court must determine not only if a policy is legal, but how far their rulings can go in blocking it. It's worth noting, the court did not address whether Trump's birthright citizenship order violates the 14th Amendment. Instead, it sidestepped the constitutional question entirely, choosing to limit the judiciary's procedural tools. This maneuver echoes a broader pattern in recent terms, where the court shifts power away from lower courts while avoiding direct rulings on politically radioactive questions. The ruling directly impacts how and where Trump's controversial birthright citizenship executive order might now take effect. Initially blocked in all 50 states by 3 separate federal courts, those injunctions must now be narrowed or re-argued. If any of those courts decide to revise their rulings to cover only their own jurisdictions or plaintiffs, the order could start to be implemented in the remaining 28 states not covered by lawsuits. This creates a patchwork legal environment, where a child born to undocumented immigrants might be considered a citizen in Massachusetts, but not in Texas. This could sow legal chaos. Hospitals, state agencies, and federal services could receive conflicting guidance based on where the child is born. Immigration attorneys say the ruling opens a constitutional gray zone with real-world consequences. Conservatives argue the order corrects what they see as a misreading of the 14th Amendment, citing the 1898 Wong-Kim Ark ruling as outdated. But legal scholars overwhelmingly maintain that birthright citizenship is settled constitutional law. Still, the executive order's fate now depends on whether these narrowed injunctions are upheld and whether any court issues a final ruling on the order's legality under the Constitution. For now, the Department of Homeland Security says no change in enforcement policy has been made. But advocacy groups fear that the mere possibility of localized implementation could cause confusion among immigrant communities and lead to civil rights violations. In short, Trump's order is not law yet, but today's ruling made it legally viable again, at least in parts of the country. Predictably, the ruling triggered an instant wave of political reaction. Former President Trump called it a giant win in all caps on Truth Social, adding, "The courts are finally correcting the deep state judges who blocked me." Republican lawmakers echoed the praise. Senator Lindsey Graham called it a long overdue reset, while House Speaker Mike Johnson praised the court for protecting presidential power from judicial overreach. Democrats were quick to strike back. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said the ruling eviscerates the court's ability to stop unlawful actions before they spread. Senator Elizabeth Warren said Congress should explore limits on executive authority and revive legislation to codify birthright citizenship protections. President Biden offered a more measured response. We respect the court's role but urge restraint and accountability in all branches. Civil rights groups were far more direct. The ACLU warned that today's ruling opens the door to discrimination under the banner of executive authority. Human Rights Watch noted that limiting injunctions could delay relief for entire vulnerable populations. Legal experts warn that the ruling will influence more than just immigration. Environmental regulations, reproductive rights, education policy, and healthcare could all see new legal fights, with narrower tools available to judges trying to halt harmful policies. As November's presidential election nears, Trump is expected to campaign heavily on this ruling as a win for his legal agenda. Democrats, meanwhile, are recalibrating their legal strategy, knowing the federal bench has less power to block controversial executive orders going forward. Legal historians say today's ruling could become a watershed moment in redefining the power dynamics between courts and presidents. By trimming the scope of lower court injunctions, the Supreme Court has shifted the balance toward the executive branch, without fully resolving the constitutional disputes behind presidential orders. This is the court's latest signal that judicial restraint is the new normal. Over the past few years, it has steadily chipped away at doctrines that once gave courts strong tools to halt federal overreach: Chevron deference, agency discretion, and now nationwide injunctions. In practical terms, this will mean more regional rulings, more legal delays, and fewer immediate protections for large populations when new federal policies are challenged. The ruling also incentivizes executive boldness. Future presidents, regardless of party, will know that even legally contested orders may take effect in some states while litigation continues. That tilts policy momentum in the White House's favor, especially in volatile election years. Over the next 30 days, lower courts will reevaluate their injunctions. But beyond this case, today's ruling will serve as a precedent across issues: abortion access, environmental regulation, student loans, LGBTQ+ protections. For now, Trump's birthright policy remains blocked, but no longer universally. And for future presidents, the playbook has changed. Wide Angle will continue covering the legal, political, and constitutional fallout. If you want independent, expert-driven news in moments like this, subscribe, ring the bell, and share this report with someone who wants clarity over noise.